Friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 334 of the Health Detective Podcast. And I was speaking with our guest before we went live, and I was saying, when you get 300 something episodes in, even in the health space, it does get kind of hard to do truly unique topics. Like usually there's some overlap, and I don't know that I can think of any overlapping episodes with this topic. So this is going to be a fun one today. I will read her bio and then we will get right into it. So Patti Milligan is a saliva enthusiast, and today she'll unpack what our spit tells us about ourselves. For 40 years, Patti has worked in both the clinical nutrition and integrative medicine / natural foods fields, bringing a unique blend of clinical, educational, holistic, consumer and PR experience. In addition, she has led a high-performance nutrition program for global business executives. Patti's work in the field of neuroscience of taste led her to the field of saliva research and how saliva holds a key to nutritional resilience. And then she has even more in her bio, so I'll have that in the show notes for you guys on YouTube as soon as we're done. And then if you're listening to this a couple weeks later on the audio, it's already there. So Patti, welcome to the Health Detective Podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes. All right. So I kind of normally start off with, what people's health symptoms were like if they had a wild personal health story. And if you did have any type of health story, I'd love to hear about that. But even more importantly, I'll address the elephant in the room right away. How the heck do you get into this? And then your passion and energy before we started talking was like amazing. So like, it's one thing to get into it. It's another thing to be this excited. So how the heck did this happen?
Oh, yes. Thank you for that question. I headed off. I worked with high-level executives, as it said in my bio, and it was always interesting because they could do high-performance nutrition at home, and they could do it actually in the office. But it was travel that was always the bane. Sometimes they would travel beautifully, and others they would feel wonky and not effective at their meetings or vacations with their family. And so I decided to study how to do high performance nutrition during travel. And so I went over to France, University of Sorbonne, to get my education. And at that point, a professor said to me, because I wanted to study taste buds, neuroscience of taste.
Mhm.
And he's like, sweetheart, you can study taste buds till you blue in the face. It's not about the taste buds. It's about the quality of saliva. And I was blown away because for 40 years, I have studied nutrition. No one has ever talked to me about saliva. And then very shortly after that, it was a Mayo Clinic doctor that came in aeronautical science. And so I was contacting him to find out more information. And he said, you know what is curious? Our saliva drops 30 to 50% when we travel. And that got my attention. So that's what led me down the pesky path of saliva. And interestingly, and I want everyone to put their thinking cap on, what happens when, and researchers call it in the tube, when we get into an airplane, what happens in the tube that drops our saliva? Do you happen to know, Dr. Ev?
I'm not a doctor, and so that's my excuse for not knowing, which is good. Yeah, I'm just a humble detective, so I don't know.
Yes. Well, that's you have a very curious mind, which is a good thing. So it's actually jet engine noise vibration, which signals the side of our nervous system that we all know, which is part of the healing process, the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest, relaxation, sleep, recovery, and digest side. Not so when our saliva drops, it sends a signal to that side of the nervous system. Hey, we can't have you on board right now. We have to stay in the fight or flight, the hyperarousal. So the subsequent side of that is it suspends immune and digestive function. So on the backside, when you land, part of the wonkiness are those digestive and immune system coming back online.
Wait, okay, hold on, I'll preface something first before I forget. So for those on audio that are wondering, like, what's going on, because it's not a big deal on our end, but I just wanted to specify. So Patti's at actually a conference right now in Arizona and was nice enough to still do this with us. So if you guys hear any birds, just enjoy it. You need to get outside anyway. So with that said, though, I was connecting that immediately when you brought that up, because I I had like a nervous thing with planes for many, many
Yes.
years, and thankfully
Yes.
overall got over that. But I'd always rather be on the ground, generally speaking.
Yes.
What I found funny is that I always assumed that I was so exhausted after flying, like, 5, 6 hours because of, just being nervous, which of course contributes to it. But then I'm thinking about
Yes.
all the people, like even my fiance, she loves flying, is totally chill up there, but I can see the weight that it takes on her as well when she's traveling. So can some of this be because we're actually everyone's triggered into this sympathetic mode, regardless of whether or not they're nervous to fly? Is that correct?
You are so right. And I'm glad you brought up the nervousness to fly because according to stats with travel industry, 45% of us have the quiverness when we fly, have whether it's full on anxiety or just general nervous system. So in again, respect to the military out there. I did not go into the military, but I understand that when we jump on a plane, our Navy SEAL inside of us stays fully alert. So part of the exhaustion that your fiance feels when she lands is that she has been on point for however the long flight is. So interestingly, I often get the question, I just did a quick flight from Arizona to San Diego. That was barely 50 minutes. Does that much impact happen? And I say, yes, it does. Because when we crawl in the tube, no matter what length of flight, that same physiologic response happens to us.
Wow. All right. Well, that's very validating. Thanks. Because I've actually adjusted things now where I purposely, like conferences and stuff, I'll try to get there a day early. And what it
Yes,
used to be is like fly in Wednesday, conference starts 8 a.m. on Thursday, and then you're doing that
yes,
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, fly out. And now I'll do something where it's like I fly in on Tuesday. It's not that I take off on Wednesday, but I
yes,
leave intentionally easier work for that day. And,
yes,
and it's worked quite effectively. So thank you. It's
yes,
validating to know it's more than just like, am I really still this
yes.
scared of flying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, that day that you take in between soothes your nervous system. So
Mhm.
you're ready to go for the conference. Good
Yeah.
job.
All right, cool. So going back specifically to Saliva, that's a very interesting story about how you got into all of this. So what does, because you're talking about like in your bio that I guess I didn't read this part, you have something very cool where you can test people's saliva and all this stuff. So I would love to know more about the testing side of this and what we're even looking for, because anyone that listens to this show is a testing
Yes.
nerd and I don't know anything about it.
Sure. Well, exactly. And I will say that some of the saliva experts, I do say I'm a saliva enthusiast in that I'm a town crier to get us all very focused on saliva. But according to the researchers, it's the next frontier of medicine. And I just, and I'll get to your question right
Mhm.
away, but just a little bit of background. I believe in my heart that our kids won't ever give a drop of blood. They will give a spit stick and they will put saliva on it and it will read their viral load. It'll read their inflammatory level, possibly their risk for degenerative disease, and maybe, and I hope, and I know this is something for you all, that nutrient deficiencies. All of those are in the pipeline right now. But interestingly, there's a couple of things that people can go get now. One is a really interesting biological marker, and I suspect you've already had great researchers on about it. It's nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is this beautiful metabolic molecule that is in our body as kind of like flame retardant for all of the inflammatory systems. And when you have a drop in nitric oxide, we have seen an increase in immunity deficiencies, especially with what we just went through with the pandemic. There's a one-to-one correlation. A drop in nitric oxide worsening symptoms with that viral load. And then nitric oxide is also distinctly tied to how the risk of cardiac events are, whether it be stroke or heart attack or high blood pressure or laying down plaque in the arteries. So it is kind of a secret sauce. And now there's a saliva test you can take, and you can Google nitric oxide saliva test. There's a couple companies out there. Berkeley Life is one. Another one is Human, Humann. that you can order up the sticks. They're not that expensive, and you spit on it, and it gives you a caliber of where you are in the day to know whether or not you need to supplement with nitric oxide or do movements to increase your nitric oxide, or maybe your body has taken on more stress than you realize, and it can help be a barometer to improve your health.
Well, and that's really interesting because it's like that's the least invasive way, for the most part, to
Yes.
test someone. So that's really cool. And so, just to be clear, because I totally misinterpreted it when you first said "won't give a drop of blood," I thought you meant like blood donation. So you meant for
Oh,
testing
yes.
specifically, because
Yes.
Reed has talked about this from the conceptual standpoint like years ago, and he kind of described, and it made sense to me as well. It's like our technology is just going to get better and better. And so, like,
Yeah.
FDN teaches a set of labs, and we might be years and years premature to actually having something like this. You even said your kids might be the
Yeah.
people that have something like this. But he brought up the idea that the testing's only going to get better. It's going to get less invasive. And then one day we are going to be able to just do some stuff that's really simple, that's like one sample,
Yeah.
and show you a lot of what's going on in your body. So I had always, and it was kind of just a hunch. It wasn't based on much. Always had
Yeah.
a hunch that I thought that was going to be blood. So you do feel that the future of this will be, hey, saliva, spit here, and now we can show you all this stuff that's going on in your body.
Sure. And I appreciate all the practitioners out there that are using blood
Mhm.
in the wonderful array that you all do in FDN. So I will say there will always be a place for that for more articulate happenings. But just for the average consumer, they really can take their health into their own hands. And so that's one side of it is saliva testing.
Mhm.
And I'll say that there's Dr. David Wong from UCLA is doing incredible work in breast cancer research. There's a test that he has through saliva that detects a different enzyme that's released when the presence of breast cancer is there 5 years before a mammogram picks it up. And
Wow.
there's another researcher that is also in clinical trials right now, identifying a very unique protein change in saliva that's linked to the risk of memory deficit and Alzheimer's. So I do think it's an area for us all to pay attention. And then a shout out for University of California, Irvine, UCI, they have a Salivary Institute. And I would say to everybody listening, go and sign up for their newsletter so that you can get this information top of mind. So that's the saliva testing, and I'm happy to answer more questions.
Yeah.
But another area that I love is resilience. How do we build resilience in the body? And we know it by saliva flow. So I have a couple of examples to share with that.
Well, that sounds like a very logical next question. I would love to know how we can do that. So let's go there. That
Yes.
makes sense to me, Patty.
Yes, certainly. And early in my career, I was a clinical dietitian and I worked in hospitals and I worked pediatric oncology. And probably I know right away you're empathetic
Mhm.
in that it's the toughest job of a dietitian to get a young child who has finished a cancer treatment to be able to refeed. And as soon as they refeed, they can go home. And that's a lot of pressure because the children want to go home and yet the clinicians want to make sure that they're safe to go home and that they can be resilient. And so one of the issues or one of the things that I've discovered, and we're doing a study right now, is saliva flow has been something none of us have looked at. And if you don't mind this cute story, I was down in the oldest wellness retreat in the world. It's called Rancho La Puerta. And I was giving a talk, probably very similar to this. And afterwards, a young couple comes up and the fellow introduced himself. And now his wife starts to cry. And I'm thinking, oh, mercy, what have I said? And he said, oh my gosh, we have our middle son is been diagnosed with failure to thrive. And for any of you that have children out there or know the medical diagnosis failure to thrive, it's the worst a parent can hear because it means the child is not growing according to the growth charts and the head circumference for the age bracket. And they said Colin was 5 years old. And he said, we're up at Stanford. And now when the pediatrician meets with us, he brings in child protective services and a psychiatrist. They think we're doing
Oh,
something
jeez.
to Colin. oh heavens. And he said, that's why my wife is crying, because we never heard this saliva business. And so I sent them home with this saliva protocol, which is to stimulate enough saliva so that we can adopt a meal, so you can enjoy a meal. And oh my gosh, I still get a little teary when I say this. But 6 months later, he sent me an email and he said, Patti, you've changed our life. Colin is no longer failure to thrive. And the pediatrician is embarrassed. He never thought of saliva. And interestingly enough, he was Korean descent. So what we did was we created a food, and it's kind of a sassy word. It's called sialagogue food, foods that produce saliva. So right before breakfast, he ate a handful of goji berries. Or another thing would be dried apricots. And so if any of you can remember what it's like to eat goji berries or dried apricots, you get juicy.
Mhm.
And then he enjoyed his meal. And it was right after the very first time he tried that, he ate an egg and toast. And that was shocking to his folks because he hadn't been able to do that. And then before lunch and dinner, they served him a soup, which is very umami, which is very saliva producing, much like miso soup or mushroom soup, but it was a Korean style soup. And he adopted and ate the meal. So it got me thinking, oh my heavens, if we could help patients refeed after just a horrible, and very invasive treatment, maybe that's another application of saliva.
That's such a because I can't even imagine, I don't have kids, I don't have an immediate plan
Yeah.
of that either, but I cannot even imagine having to deal with that, and then on top of it, this idea that and I get it, I wouldn't want it any other way, but, like, these professionals are coming into making sure you're not doing something wrong, and again, of course, we
Yes.
from a general perspective, we have to argue for that just in case. But then from the individual
Yes.
perspective, that must be terrible. Like you're getting indirectly accused of it almost. And then something as, I mean, at least action wise, this is fairly simple. It's not like what you
Yeah.
recommended is the toughest thing in the world, especially compared to some of the
Yes.
stuff that we recommend. Like we'll really get people having to dial some stuff in. So, I mean, this was simple enough. A
Yes.
kid can do it. Right. So,
Yes.
yeah, that's amazing.
Exactly. So one of the practical applications to that
Mhm.
is to check in with yourself 4 times a day to see what your saliva flow is. And I know when I say this, there's a little bit of shock and awe, but it's still so fun to say. We produce 1.5 to 2 liters of saliva every day. So if you think of a Coca-Cola liter bottle, you're producing 2 of those every single day. And 1 liter of it you recycle, which is really potent and powerful. That's why I believe there's so many messages in saliva that are yet to be uncovered. But interestingly enough, if you just wake up in the morning, kind of do a quick assessment, like how juicy am I, right before lunch, right before dinner, and right before bed, it'll give you a checkpoint to say, how juicy am I? And what's interesting about that is it's bi-directional to the side of our nervous system that's all about rest and healing and regeneration. So to me, although it's not been proved in science yet, by measuring your saliva flow, it can help you know if you're soothing yourself enough in the side of the nervous system that brings about resilience and regeneration. So when you get up in the morning, if you're dry, then you could think, I probably need to increase my salivary flow. And there's an ancient Ayurvedic method that I'm happy to show people. It takes 10 seconds to show to stimulate saliva, which remember always signals the side of the nervous system, which is rest and relaxation. So you could do that in the morning, right before lunch. Let's say you've had a stressful morning
Mhm.
and you check and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm dry. Now, certainly hydration makes a difference, but I'm sure most of your listeners are well clued into hydration. So you can go, my nervous system has been in flight or flight way too much of the morning. So right before lunch, then you could do this exercise, or you could do a sialagogue food to enjoy lunch, and right before dinner and right before bed. So it's kind of easy in a way, but I do think it gives control back to the practitioner and the consumer to help themselves.
I have a bit of I think it will lead somewhere, but it might seem like a random question at first because anecdotal and personal. So, of course, now that you're saying this, right, this is like one of those things like breathing. Now, all of a sudden, I'm conscious of,
Yes.
okay, yeah, I mean,
Yes.
everything feels normal in my mouth. Like I feel like I have a normal amount of saliva, but it
Yeah.
instantly triggered this memory. So, Patty, I got into this work because I was one of those people that had a bunch of different health conditions as a young adult, and
Yes.
kid, and thankfully, I don't meet the diagnostic criteria for those anymore, which is wonderful. But one of the diagnoses was panic disorder and generalized anxiety
Oh,
disorder. And I
yes.
I remember the worst year for it was about 15 to 16 years old. So I think that was around ninth grade for me, 14 to 15 maybe. And
Sure.
now that was our middle schools here are seventh to ninth. And so you're a lot more controlled and you're not allowed to do certain things. And I remember I would get in trouble because I had to constantly carry a water bottle around because my
Oh,
mouth was
yes.
so dry all the time that like it just made me more anxious. So I know that something like anxiety can cause that. That's a known symptom, but
Yes.
now I'm kind of understanding this deeper and, like you said, bi-directional connection here. So can we like talk
Yes.
about why does that actually happen? Where okay, this kid's anxious, but I mean, my mouth was Sahara level dry to the point like it's freaking
Yes.
me out.
Oh, yes. Oh, goodness. And thank you for mentioning that because
Mhm.
that is so prevalent with so many people. And it might be episodic. In other words, they have something that hits them as a trigger in the morning that causes that,
Mhm.
or it can be really lifelong. And interestingly enough, one is sucking on lozenges makes a big difference. But because if you think about it, and I apologize, my analogy to computers, hopefully it hits well, but our nervous system is like our security system in our computer, are always assessing what's going on, what's a threat, what's a not threat. So I would say that you have a very good the security system for your body. Like you have all senses online detecting what's a threat and what's a friend, what's a foe, and that many times that trigger was like, oh gosh, I gotta be on high alert. Remember that high alert tells the side of the nervous system that's fight or flight, stay engaged, and kicks the rest and relaxation side of the nervous system to the curb. And that one always stays down, if you will. I always say the hyperarousal system hijacks the parasympathetic nervous system, and they always scoot back and settle down until the issue has cleared. So if you catch yourself in that, have wonderful grace to your system because it's detecting everything, but then do some things to help soothe your saliva flow so that you can send the nervous system out of being kicked to the curb and say, come on in, I need your side of functionality.
Yeah. And so work with me here because I'm trying to connect a couple things.
Sure.
With this bidirectional aspect, is it correct to say then that, okay, if someone is anxious, that could reduce the salivary production temporarily, but similarly, if my saliva was low, that could also put me not into a panic state, but more sympathetic. Is that correct?
You are brilliant. Yes, you connected the dots. It's bi-directional, so it can impact the nervous system, and the nervous system can impact the saliva.
A
Yes.
all right, because the reason I just asked is we did this thing called Holistic Health Week a couple weeks ago, so it was summit style. It wasn't a summit, but it was like a bunch of speakers in 1 week, and we
Sure.
started off the week with Sachin Patel, and Sachin
Yes.
did a whole talk on breathing, and I was thinking about what connected for me is he was talking about mouth breathers, specifically how mouth breathing at night, if you do some taping, right? That might make you feel
Yes.
dramatically better. And I'm like, that made a lot of sense to me that breathing through your
Yeah.
nose would do that. But now I'm realizing this is kind of like double whammy because not only is breathing
Yes.
nasally better, but if I am breathing through my mouth, lower salivary, like
Yes.
now it's drier and that triggers
Yes.
sympathetic, of course I wake up feeling like crap.
Yes. Brilliant. You're exactly right. And also, let me mention breathing through the nose, you are so right, is the quickest to bring about the parasympathetic flow. And secondly, it also increases nitric oxide. So sends a signal to your body like everything is good. We can worry about healing while you're sleeping because we don't have to be on the detection side of worrying about a foe. We can nurture the body.
That makes a lot more sense to me. Not that I always knew that the nasal breathing was beneficial for a variety of reasons, but the stories and the testimonials that you hear about, because I don't, thankfully at this point in my life, I probably would have benefited from mouth taping before, but now I know I'm good to go. And
Sure.
when you hear the stories, people are like, "Oh, 3 nights, I got the best sleep of my life." I'm like, just from taping the mouth, but there's
No.
so many aspects here that are contributing to deeper rest and relaxation. Now, I mean, hell, I'll just try
Yes.
it just to give it a shot. Who knows? So very, very cool. With
Yes. So,
oh
so
yeah,
if I may stop you, I'm
please.
so sorry to interrupt, but I thought I left on a cliffhanger. I wanted to share the Ayurvedic, and people
Oh
can
yes,
Google
thank you.
or YouTube this as well, but the Ayurvedic way to stimulate saliva flow,
Mhm.
because you can do it as soon as you feel dry mouth. You can do it standing in a line at Starbucks. You can do it when you get a little anxiety hit. And it's 4 positions in the mouth, and you do each position 6 times. So, Detective Ev, if you
Let's
want
do
to
it.
do it with me.
I'm in. I'm in.
So the first is you're going to put your tongue on the roof of your mouth. You're going to check to the right side and stick your tongue in your cheek. Now your left side. And then underneath your bottom teeth. So we do that propel 6 times. So in other words, I won't talk when I do it, but we can all do it together. So it's up the top of the roof,
Mhm.
right, left, bottom, up, left, right, left, bottom, up. And I'm already juicy and I just did it 4 times. So that could be a quick kind of fix it to help encourage that nervous system to produce the salivary flow.
I swear this show took such an upgrade when we started doing videos 6, 7 months ago. The amount of things that I'm asked to do live for these people is
I
awesome.
bet.
That's a good one.
I
No, that did
bet.
work. That's very cool. And it's simple.
Yes.
Man, it's like I wish I had so
Yes.
many of these tools
At no
when I was
cost,
younger.
right?
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of, I wanted to talk a little bit more about testing and where we're currently at, because
Yes.
to give you the perspective of where most of our audience would have knowledge, when we're using
Yes.
salivary testing, because we do use it, it's mostly for hormones, and that's great.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you're mentioning things like nitric oxide, which could be news to a lot of people here. I'm wondering, are there other things that are valid to test via saliva that you don't think are utilized often enough?
Yes, and I will say, and I'm so sorry. That's why we all got to crowd control here. Uh, Everything right now is still in clinical testing.
Okay.
So commercially, what's available even to the practitioner, and I love that you guys do hormone testing because it's so much more accurate and gets to the pinch point right away. And nitric oxide probably. There's another one that those same companies that I mentioned have, which is uric acid.
Mm.
And what's unique about uric acid, and I know I'm singing to the choir for you and the clinicians out there, because it's good kidney function, number one. And secondly, now some clinicians are tying it to the use of different dietary regimen. So if you have anybody on paleo or high protein diets, and they do a spit stick and check their uric acid and it tends to be going up, it can indicate that the burden of protein and amino acids in the system is overriding and the body is unable to clear out uric acid. So I'm working in the lifestyle wellness area, using it with athletes, and just to make sure they can dial in their diet a little bit more accurately for the right percent of protein in their diet.
If most of this stuff is then not available currently, but you also said that, hey,
Yes.
maybe our kids are going to have these insane methods of testing, or not methods really. I guess it's still saliva, but what I more mean is like we're going to be able to get so much data from it. I'm curious, what do you think, if you can hint at this, what do you think might be something that could be on the market within the next 5 to 10 years that might be available to the
Oh,
consumer
yes.
practitioners?
Yes. Right now, there's a fast pace, and it all became after the pandemic because salivary testing for the virus was pretty widespread, if you will. So those researchers now have turned their attention to 3 areas. The first being the risk of degenerative disease. So as I mentioned, breast cancer and Alzheimer's, that will easily be available in the next couple of years. Second is viral load. So you can imagine if you're ready to go to a conference or ready to jump on a plane, or your child is headed off to school and you just want to know what heck is going on with their immune system, you could possibly do a spit stick and see their viral load and say, their immune system is running over in terms of what they're processing. Because right now it's kind of a bit of a, I mean, sorry for my language, but a crapshoot, knowing how our immune system is functioning, right?
Mhm.
And so those tests will be out in the next couple of years. And the third area, which is a sweet spot for me, and I'm sure for you, is to understand the magnesium level somebody takes, the potassium level somebody takes, the vitamin C. Is it being utilized by the body? And now testing is being undertaken in the clinical realm to say, we can develop a test to measure magnesium levels. So think of an athlete, or think of somebody making dramatic changes in their diet, starting to take a magnesium supplement. At this point, other than symptom relief, you don't know if it's really being utilized by the body. And I think very quickly we will. And then probably the fourth area, and maybe this will hit many of the clinicians. Right now, 7 out of 10 adults, as they get older, have a higher risk of choke, which is directly correlated to a loss of saliva. And this one breaks my heart because it directly affected my family. My grandmother at 97 had been a greeter at Walmart, so she's very active, came out from Minnesota to live with me in Arizona. And and then we decided we needed to be more social for her. So we put her in a nursing facility. And the first thing she said is, I can't go to the dining room and eat with people. I might choke. And we prodded and encouraged her to say, oh no, you'll be fine.
Mhm.
And what do you think happened? Oh, goodness. The first meal she choked, and the paramedics were called, and she took her first ambulance ride at 97 years old. And thankfully, she was fine. But when she got back to the nursing facility, she never ate in the dining room again. And according to the director, that is so common. And so I have a great, I guess, wish out there for all of you wonderful clinicians, that you start asking your patients and your clients, what do they think their nervousness is around risk of choke? Because the corrective method would be to offer them a food that would help produce saliva. And that could be hot water with a squeeze of lemon. That could be cinnamon tea. That could be a delicious cup of soup, would stimulate saliva. And although we've not studied it yet,
Mhm.
I believe in my heart that when somebody has, well, I mean, what we do know is the risk of choke leads to isolation away from people for eating, malnourishment, and perish. That is a clear methodology. And I really do believe if we can catch the risk of choke early enough and return saliva to adequate levels for meals, we will see a different population. And I would love to give dignity to our elderly.
Yeah, okay, that's an area that I'm not familiar with at all. And just to be clear, because I think I connected it once you talked about
Yeah.
these people at the like the people that work there saying that this happens all the time. You're suggesting that the elderly person, 97, right? They understand that they're not going to they're not producing enough saliva and that they, don't do well with foods. That's why they're nervous to go to the dining hall and eat there, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly right. So they recognize that they have dry mouth, and
Okay.
that tendency is a risk of choking. Yes.
All right. And then when your grandmother, she wasn't nervous with you because what? Like she would eat more liquids or just knew that she could take her time? Like why? I guess what I'm wondering is why was it any better at
Yes.
home versus the dining hall?
Yes. Well, number one, I honestly don't know if it was really any better.
Okay.
It's just she was more relaxed eating with us, which, as we know, is hit what we early talked about, which was the anxiousness, causing that side of the nervous system to camp in the background instead of come full circle. Because you can imagine before every meal, we naturally oscillate into parasympathetic flow, which stimulates saliva to welcome and kind of open the retail hours of the digestive tract, right? And so when that naturally happens, and when you're nervous about eating around others, or the meal choices are not there to produce saliva, I think that's the risk of choking. So sorry if I didn't explain it well enough.
No, that's okay. I'm just, yeah, I'm learning something. And hopefully for the people that are listening, we have a lot of our audience is in their like 35 to 55 years old. And so I
Yes,
can imagine a lot of them having parents, or if they're lucky enough, grandparents that are of this age. And
yes,
it could be great insight for them because these people care so much. That's why they do this work. So they'll be like the
yes,
ones figuring it out for
yes,
grandma today.
exactly. No, and thank you for mentioning that, because I think it's a low level, or what do they call that? Low hanging fruit, to
Yes.
just say, what's your, I mean, how juicy is your mouth?
Mhm.
Or maybe another way is, do you feel like you're nervous about eating and you might choke? And I think that would open the floodgate of conversation of an area that is right now kind of silent.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So another question I had kind of, and I might be off the mark here, but I'm wondering, you'd be the person to ask. There are some things thrown around in the natural and functional medicine space. I went through the FDN course years ago, but I think this might even still be in there. And Reed does not act like this is a holy grail. It's a very, he words it as a very preliminary, very much don't take it with a grain of salt type of test. What I'm getting at is it's
Yes,
something along the lines of you wake up, I think it's like your first spit of the day and you spit into clear water and you're trying to see, is there
yes,
fungal overgrowth candida? Is there validity to this? Can people do stuff at home to get an idea of the quality of their saliva?
yes. I mean, and this is another test that is, I feel like I'm offering all these things that aren't quite available yet. But this test is quite desired for athletes, for pilots, and for the elderly. It's called saliva flow, and you're exactly right. You swish around and spit,
Mhm.
and then you measure timing, and 30 seconds later you spit again, and 30 seconds later you spit again. And the idea is, if you have good salivary flow, you're going to have at least 30 cc's of saliva each 30 seconds. And if it's less, that can indicate to you that you are moving toward dry mouth, or the medical diagnosis xerostomia.
Okay. And by the way, just so
And
you know,
medication, yeah, sorry to
that's
interrupt you,
okay.
but medications induce this as well.
Yeah.
So it can be everything that somebody is doing in healthy lifestyle, but if they have a medication that induces it, it can cause a problem.
Is it, because I don't know all the medications offhand, but I'm thinking, isn't one category of ones that can cause dry mouth or like, they're amphetamines of some sort. The things that they give to kids with
Yes,
ADHD. But I'm thinking like, oh,
yes,
that puts you in a sympathetic state though, because it's
yes,
okay.
exactly. You
Huh.
are exactly right. And on point, pain medication. So many of our patients, and again, I am speaking on the spectrum a little older,
Mhm.
but have arthritis, and they've been taking pain medication. They don't realize the association that it's
Wow.
dimmed their saliva. And then maybe at some point, and I want to make sure I address all your questions, but there's 4 categories of foods that are called sialagogues. And I would love to review this so that clinicians have this in their pocket and can share it with their clients and patients.
We're going to review that in about 10 seconds. I wanted to let you know that someone from the audience, in regards to your whole thing with
Yeah.
the elderly and what we can do for them, Dawn just said, that's awesome,
Yes.
Patty. Thank you so much. So just wanted to let you know.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Dawn. All right. So let's break down these foods. I'd love to hear about this.
Yes. So, and I think when I say this, it'll be like, duh, of course it adds saliva, but using it now strategically. So the first
Mhm.
is citrus. So anything with lemon or lime or grapefruit or orange, and that can simply be a squeeze in a fresh glass of water. So it can be simple. That stimulates the saliva flow. Second category I mentioned already were things like dried fruits, but specifically pomegranate seeds, goji berries, and dried apricots. Third are this volume of foods known as umami. So we know them as being flesh protein foods and soups. So mushrooms, squash soup, and then miso soup fall into that category.
Mhm.
And then fourth is a variety of teas. So I'm thinking all these foods are kind of easier to get access. And the are something like African red bush tea, rooibos tea, uh, chamomile tea, cinnamon tea, lemon tea, even lavender tea, which isn't always so convenient to find, but all stimulate that sialagogue method of producing some juiciness in the mouth.
That's awesome. One thing I wanted to touch on too was again, some of this stuff's really basic, which is what makes it so cool because the science behind it seems super advanced and interesting. But I love when the practical side is simple. Like
Yes,
my whole thing that I nerd out on more than anything else is like circadian
yeah,
biology and light. And it's like we can get into
yes,
all of this. Here's the bottom line: sleep in the dark, see the sunrise, get outside as much as possible. Right? Very easy to understand the implementation of it. Very complex to understand what it's doing to our body. And so one of the things I was thinking about throughout our conversation today is, all right, well, I know if people aren't hydrated properly, from my understanding, that can lead to less saliva production. And then we all know that you kind of feel like crap if you're not hydrated well. But now I'm adding this additional thing of I'm actually putting my body into a sympathetic state then just from doing that. That's correct as well?
oh my gosh, Detective Ev, you got it. No, you're exactly right. And I would even say for the group of people out there, and again, I suspect that many practitioners are already well cramped in this, but the idea that our delicious water is so pure for most of us in the Western world, which is wonderful, but we want to return the water much more to well water. So adding the squeeze of lime or lemon, adding a little trace minerals or electrolytes to water really makes a difference because it allows the water to be in the form like gel like,
Mhm.
which is much more like saliva.
And you're correct to say that yes, on paper, our practitioners, including myself, we know to do this. I think there's a different weight that comes from these things when you understand the potential consequences. Because full transparency,
Yes.
like especially as it gets warmer here, there's plenty of days where like, oh, I woke up and I actually got right into work and I probably didn't drink enough, and then I went and played pickleball or something. I'm outside, and by the end of the day, it's like, no, I was a little more dehydrated than not. Now, in the back of my head, I'm just thinking, well, duh, you need more water, dummy. Like you should do that. But I
Yeah.
actually really do believe this carries a different weight now because each time I'm going to be thinking, Ev, was this worth putting yourself into a sympathetic state for you? Like you want to take off time on your life over time by
Yes.
just not drinking the water?
Yes.
I actually do think this holds a lot more weight in people's minds, even for those of us that are already into health.
Yes. I could brilliantly put because I agree with you. And
Mhm.
it's so subtle, right? And our body does everything to compensate. And so that's where if we can help it out by getting juicy,
Mhm.
then we settle the system down and soothe it to be able to do all the natural functioning that it wants to. So I think you said it better than me, but
Well, with our last, and this isn't too strict, but just to be clear, we got about 7 minutes left in the show. So I
okay.
wanted to talk about because I know there's got to be people that are watching or listening in the future that are interested. So, what is it that you actually do? Like, what does Patty do nowadays? Or are
Yeah.
you working with people? What do you offer? I'm very interested. So let's talk about that.
Sure. Yes. Well, like I said, I'm kind of a town crier in that I've identified four silos of salivary work being done.
Mhm.
The first is, which many of us love, is in the culinary world. There's a group of saliva researchers that are pairing what we drink and what we eat to maximize that for salivary flow. Second is, as you mentioned, the diagnostic side of salivary measures, understanding what specifically, and I apologize, I think there's a waste management truck in the background, so I hope you can hear me. Uh, and thirdly, there's the whole medical diagnosis of xerostomia. And then fourth, there's the risk of choking. So I try to bring all those people together. So I give many presentations right now, it seems of late, to folks refeeding in the medical community. So whether that's an adult who has been through head and neck surgery or whether it's a child coming off chemo. So I do that. And then I also turn my attention to looking at the salivary diagnostics, just to make sure that the researchers know what somebody else is doing. So I do that. And then I had put together a travel performance nutrition kit based on this salivary flow to make sure that traveling was easier on the body, building resilience while we travel. So that's called Renewal Kit for Travelers. So I run that business, if you will.
Very cool. I usually take this time to ask about like quote unquote client testimonials. And here's how I'll word
Yeah.
it, because you already gave this amazing story of that young child with the parents, right? They have the protective services now looking at them. So I'm sure with how long you've done this, there might just be one more or two interesting stories. So
Yes.
I'd love to, I always like ending with this. Like, what's another cool story that would be similar to that, where, hey, you helped them implement these kind of simple things, but it had such a profound effect on their life?
Yes. Oh, thank you for asking
Yeah.
that. So I'll bring it forward talking about Jeffrey. So he had tongue cancer and he was a young man. He was 32 years old and he had a resection of his tongue. And as he was gaining back his, after chemo and radiation, gaining back his health, he recognized that he had such dry mouth. So we worked together and I introduced Sialagang foods, introduced that Chinese way to produce saliva. And then the beautiful thing is he was picked up as a spokesperson for the head and neck cancer world to share the story of how resilient he got and how fast he kept on his weight and how wonderful he was, because I understand from that world. I've not been there, but head and neck cancers, they do not look forward to meals. It is torture for them to enjoy meals with people and socialization. And all of us that do that all day long, we take that for granted. But he said, Patti, you brought back my life because I now enjoy meeting people and eating, because I have tools in my toolkit to pull out and enjoy. He said that took me out of isolation to enjoy people. And that story just warms my heart, because that's a side effect of some of these treatments. And I know in some of the health issues that you talk about, that often is not talked about, is the isolation of these diseases
Mhm.
and treatment plans. And so anything we can do to bring people back into the community and unity of feeling good and healthy, I just welcome.
Yeah, what a great point about the isolation. Whether someone has Hashimoto's thyroiditis and they come on, or panic disorder, and I had severe cystic acne, which in a sense is not the most dangerous diagnosis, but certainly it is isolating. Like
Yes,
when you're coming out of these health issues, man, I always say it's a separate point, but it's a personal development journey with health as the vehicle, because
yes,
you cannot come out on the other side as the same person. It doesn't exist anymore. So
yes.
it takes a lot to like come out of the pits of this and get rehabilitated, basically. Yeah, back into stuff, get the health under control. So what a I've loved this topic. This has been very fun. Where can people find you if they'd like to like follow you or interact with you?
Sure. LinkedIn is probably the best. I have been asked to write a book. I've been asked to have a website, and I've just been so busy in the travel business that I haven't gotten to those. But my name, Patti Milligan, and I do have Saliva Enthusiast on my LinkedIn. So I'm sure if they Google it, they could find me. And I love to answer questions and I love to provide references and resources to people. So please reach out.
All right, my friend. And here is the signature question to finish up the show. And it could be about saliva, but it's a general health question, so you can take it any way you'd like. The question is, if we gave Patti a magic wand and you could wave it, and you can get every single person watching or listening to this, whether now or in the future, to do one thing for our health. So that means you can get us to start doing one thing, or you can force us to stop doing one thing. What is the one thing that Patti gets us to do?
Well, thank you for that great question. I would say check your thoughts, because there's a great researcher out of Stanford. Her name is Aaliyah Crum. What a great name for a nutrition researcher, right? Dr. Aaliyah Crum. And she has studied that mindset. Watch our mindset. It influences our blood and body chemistries. And so I would say no matter what your routine is, no matter how healthy you are or what you're struggling with, check your thoughts, realizing that all of it impacts the beautiful physiology in your body.
Excellent. Patty, thank you so much for coming on today. Really, really cool to have something this unique, again, this far into the show. A lot to think about.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your just wonderful, juicy questions.